Okay, guys. Yeah, so I wanted to get on again tonight one more time, and I had an idea. This was probably around. Um, this was around. It was quite a few months ago. It was sometime last year. I had this idea, and I do like the idea of simulation theory, and thinking that we might possibly be in some sort of simulated world, and that we're in some kind of uh sorry, I was trying to close an app or a video. Some kind of simulated reality is an interesting idea. I mean, and it's talked about and talked about and talked about, and I mean, it's more or less gained a lot of popularity now, um but I like the idea. I mean, there's nothing, you get into, I know in college I took a class called knowledge and its limits, and you get into epistemology, and especially Descartes' meditations and some of the deeper realms of epistemology. Um, you begin to realize that you know um, very little can be said with absolute certainty about whether the medium in which we exist, the plane in which we exist, is really real, or if more importantly, there's something. If we exist, there's something we have to exist within, because there's some sort of boundary somewhere between the thing and us, and without that boundary, wouldn't exist, or else everything would bleed into everything else, and nothing would exist individually. So, I mean, there's uh, really the question that a lot of people will ask themselves, and at least the deeper, more epistemological question that people can ask themselves about their experiences is, what was this something that I legitimately experienced? I love the idea that we were just simulated into existence right now, right at this very moment. And everything I thought was the past behind me is just an implanted memory, right? Um, and that was one of the ideas raised in this course. How do you know that any of that was real and that it's not simply an illusion, right? Um, that you're having about the past and having a memory. Maybe it's not a memory. Maybe it's not a legitimate memory because it wasn't a legitimate experience. You didn't record anything. It's simply been implanted into your brain. It's just information that you perceive as memory, even though it's not actually memory. So at this very moment, you were simulated into existence. Nothing that you think happened actually happened. You just have the illusion. You've been programmed with the illusion that it did. And that's an idea as well. But regardless, the question that a lot of people will ask themselves and get really deep into, if they let more of their intuition and their imagination explore, is, was any of that really real? Did it actually happen? Am I in some sort of, and that's kind of where this all comes from. It's basic epistemology expressed in kind of a stoner thought, right? Uh, is any of the knowledge that I have actually knowledge, or is it some kind of collective illusion? Is it, are we just agreeing that it's true? And it's not actually true. We just mutually perceive it rather than it actually existing. So that's one thing that we have to know, right? I mean, mutual agreement, right? So mutual agreement that a mutual perception about something, the mutuality of a perception of something external to two people that they are both perceiving simultaneously, does not indicate, the fact that it's mutual does not indicate that the thing actually that is being externally perceived exists, right? For one thing. And, right, it could just as easily be that my perception of someone else perceiving it is merely an illusion in of itself. And so ultimately, if we can't prove that there's a counterpart simultaneously perceiving the same external object, we can't prove that external object exists, because that other perceiver is could be another simulated external object. So, what of the external experience? Descartes' question, what of my external experiences, right, actually occurred, you know, or what of it is not an illusion? And so his meditations, he attempts to, I believe, I don't, his phrase, let's see, it's the concept of ground for doubt is the words that Descartes used. And I'm just going to pull up the quote. The originator of so he is the originator of Cartesian thought, put all beliefs, ideas, and thought and matter in doubt. He showed that his grounds or reasoning for any knowledge could just as well be false. Sensory experience, the primary mode of knowledge, is often erroneous and therefore must be doubted. So this is a kind of so yeah it's a so as they call it, it's Cartesian doubt, um, and that's the official term in philosophy for it, at least in the study of philosophy. And yet there's the question of what of our sensory experiences is not simulated. Um, and you know, Descartes' thinking was, is this just an illusion put in my mind by some sort of demon? It's Descartes' demon, and what I think is truth and what I think is good, is that merely an illusion created by some sort of demon that's, I mean, so he really got deep into the rabbit hole of epistemology, and ultimately epistemology becomes an infinite rabbit hole. And the deeper that you go into that rabbit hole, you realize that reality, in many ways, at least when thinking about the origin of the universe and everything else, contradicts itself and breaks down. I mean, basic causality breaks down. Basic human logic breaks down, and at least the universe as we see it at that level doesn't seem to function according to basic human logic of really any kind, causal, conditional, any kind of formal. um, I mean, it doesn't seem to function according to any of our more conventional ways of thinking logically. So um, regardless, simulation theory is very interesting, but and right, it's all simulation theory is merely a modern iteration of Cartesian doubt. And I mean, it's essentially just Cartesian doubt arising in another period, under with a different structure, right? As a different thought, but at the basic impulse behind simulation theory is Cartesian doubt that has been around for quite a long time. So, um, yeah, so it's just a form of Cartesian doubt. But um, regardless, my particular take on simulation theory, or at least I like to play around with the idea. So, assuming that we are in some sort of simulation, we could look at it teleologically. What justifies it? Why are we in it? Why does it exist? Why would we be simulated? Right? Why would they simulate a conscious? What would be the purpose? Right? The utility of such a simulation. What would be the point of it? Right? Because that ultimately gets you closer to discussing whether um, uh, like I think for me that gets me closer to questioning um, you know why. So one of the ways to approach simulation theory or to oppose it is to ask, well, why would we be simulated? What would be the point of a simulation? Right? To take a teleological position. So it would be an opposition based on teleology. What would be the utility of such a thing, of a simulation like that? What would be the possible reason for it? And um, the answer is, at least my answer, if I were to provide one, is in many ways, um, I I think a lot of people experience things in daily life which lead them to belief in God or some other higher power. Um, that their experiences aren't that some of the things they experience are truly unrandom, right? So they are truly not random, right? So they assume that there's some sort of purpose, or that there's some sort of larger intention or intentionality behind events and their own experiences. And so, you know, that leads into the belief in a higher power. Now, as a human being, our consciousness is inherently narcissistic. So we always see things from our own perspective, and we always see things as they relate to us, and we view everything through the lens of the self. So when things happen, things that are lucky, we just assume, oh, well, that relates to me, and that event happened because it's setting me in this direction. It's me, and right. I mean, it's the narcissism of human consciousness in a sense. But regardless, I mean, I've had experiences like that. I'm only human, so, you know, I can't deny that I've had experiences that have taken me down a bit of a rabbit hole of questioning, was that truly random? Or, um, and I mean, if you're not careful, that could just lapse into outright schizophrenia. So, I mean, you have to be careful with questioning whether the patterns that you observe in events actually relate to you and are So in any case, the way that I would look at, um, in many ways, this ties back into simulation theory, at least somewhat, but I view a lot of, you know, in a way, what the simulation could be. So if, yeah, we experience things, humans at least testify and attest to experiencing things all the time that um, that they think are not random. And, maybe anecdotally an individual could experience so many of those things and then they're going to think to themselves, okay, well, maybe we are in some sort of simulation because I don't really see how else that could happen. And if we're in a simulation, then I mean that easily explains why some people experience events that seem not random. Spiritual in that sense, spiritually unrandom. Um, and you know, um, hopefully all of this is coherent. It's a bit late, but regardless, in a way, and one argument, one way of defining God that I talked to the guy about this, a while back was that God is just whatever higher civilization is running the simulation, and that's actually a compelling way of defining God, because then anything supernatural, I'm like I can dismiss that, but something like a simulation, a simulator God or something like that, who's running the simulation and he's in control of it and everything else. And so he knows what's happening inside of it, and that's why he's omnipotent and all knowing and everything else. So this version of God is at least a compelling definition of what that is. So he's the thing running the simulation. And so when we experience events that have that sense of, spiritual unrandomness to them, in a way, I view that as kind of like the motor of fate. So the motor of fate is chugging along and it's pushing individuals toward different opportunities and away from others, toward different experiences and away from others. And we're all moving within branches of possibility. And the motor of fate is pushing us along in different branches of possibility so that the simulators can then can then learn about what happens when particular so they can learn more about the world that way, right? Um, by putting individuals in different situations and then testing out how they react and then seeing how the events unfold. Um, but in this sense, uh, you know, my a compelling definition of God to me is that it is whatever is running the simulation that we happen to be in, assuming that we are in a simulation. And from a utility perspective, it may seem ridiculous, and I'm fully willing to take that position as well. But um, regardless, uh, regardless, a definition of God would be it's whatever higher civilization is. It's all knowing, and it's because it runs the simulation. It can keep track of every possible movement, every variable within it, and our reality isn't nearly as complex as we might think because it's a contained simulation. We only have the perspective that it is, which may all be an illusion, and we imagine we have the illusion that we're in an infinite universe when really, like in Rick and Morty, there's the idea of just being in a it's some sort of limited and contained tessellated void or something like that. So it's a void, but it's a contained void that we're in. And since we're microscopic creatures in the grand scheme of things, at least from our perspective, I mean, size and scale are matter. They're illusions of the human perception in a sense. Um, Nothing is large and nothing is small compared to something larger or smaller. So um, in any case, so I would view God, right, defining God as whatever higher civilization is running the simulation that we're in, which has a lot of the properties of God that we would normally attribute to a God. And I would view it as kind of like the and events that humans experience that are almost spiritually unrandom. Um, are all a part of the simulation, and it's in my view, it's kind of like the motor of fate, and it's you know uh, pushing individuals in branches of possibility and toward different experiences and toward more other opportunities, and in this way, um, I would define God as kind of like the motor of fate. Uh, it doesn't necessarily mean he's benevolent, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that all of us are going to good places, right? I mean, he this thing, whatever it, if it's real, right? If again, I'm just spitballing here. I'm just playing around with the idea. I would just as easily oppose anything that I'm saying, but to run away with the interpretation, it's more fun to just make the assumptions and then move within the frame rather than debate it endlessly. So at least to have fun theorizing. So in any case, that's my definition of God within the context of simulation theory as the motor of fate, pushing individuals in branches of possibility and toward opportunities and toward experiences, toward you know toward specific opportunities and experiences, and toward certain people, not others. You know, and it doesn't mean that we're all headed to a good place. I never said it was benevolent, right? It certainly could be non-benevolent. You know, it it could be sending some people to madness and to poverty and to destitution. And it could be simply a dispassionate motor of determination that will push individuals in different directions just to see what plays out. Whether it's doing it for fun, for entertainment purposes. I mean, we could just be this is a simulation. We could just be this could be like the Truman Show, and whoever's outside the simulation just gets to watch as we suffer and die and you know uh, hedonistically pursue things and flitter around being mortals, and it'd be a hilarious show to watch from the outside. I mean, and also a horribly depressing one. um, but you know you could go anywhere with that, but this is my so I titled this the motor of fate, which is a definition of God within the context of simulation theory, as a dispassionate arbiter and dispenser of fate, uh, which our the outcomes of our lives are often realized not via foresight, right? Um, and I'm not saying that proves anything, right? So this is just a complementary fact. I'm not using it to prove that any of this is true. This is a theory that I'm kind of just playing around with. But you know, one of the qualities of realizing oneself and having life experience and everything else is that it's very much a crapshoot, and it's very much a process by which we sort of just become something. And there, although we may plan, and planning certainly, and planning and organization and personal responsibility and all of these things definitely can skew the outcome in one or another direction. But ultimately, there is the element of chaos in any endeavor, and so the realization of the self and of one's goals ends up still being, regardless of whether or not there was planning involved and foresight, ends up being a matter of contingency, fundamentally, um, and and how outcomes are rendered in an individual's life and what fate becomes for each particular individual uh, is a very contingent thing, and it varies per the individual. I mean, the genetic diversity that our species has produced is, I mean, insane. But you know, this is my definition of God, I guess, within the context of simulation theory, as a kind of motor of fate in that way. But um, so many other things to explore here. Uh, but I don't know if there are really any viewers right now, but if there are any like questions or related questions, then those could be posed. If not, then I'll probably stop the stream. But go to the bathroom. Okay. Um, yeah. So, anyway, um, so I guess what I wanted to pose in this video to summarize is that I think I might have some sort of definition of God within the context of s- uh, in the context of simulation theory, um, as being kind of like a motor of fate, um, pushing individuals in different paths and branches of possibility, and leading them to some opportunities away from others towards some experiences and not others, and essentially trying through them to realize a particular reality so that it can learn from our own interpretation of that reality. It can learn from, by simulating conscious entities like that, it can extract knowledge from that, in the sense that, wouldn't it be beneficial for us to, I mean, it's almost like we are God's, we could be seen as God's AIs. And we build the AIs, and they'll surpass us computationally, everything else. But God would have had the impulse, essentially, to do the same thing, to create more minds that would be capable of learning at ever greater exponential levels of knowledge. And by pushing individuals in different paths and toward different possibilities and away from others, and toward different opportunities and away from others, he is trying through us to realize new truths and develop and acquire new interpretations of reality, and to develop new values and new arguments, and new ways of looking at the world. And um, so in that sense, he extracts, we are, we're almost like perspective generators, and our output is perspective, and God extracts that from us to then um, you know exploits us. And this is all just I'm running away essentially with a way of looking at simulation theory. But in any case, that would be all I would really want to say in this video. um, yeah. um, mm, yeah, so we can talk more about Cartesian doubt, maybe. That might be interesting. um, so his Yeah, honestly, I think I might get into more of the details of Cartesian doubt in the next stream. I think I'm going to end this one. Thank you for watching.